Hello my beautiful watchers and welcome back to Lost in Adaptation, the show dedicated to comparing films to the books they were based on. At some point in the 1970s, a drunken Englishman named Douglas Adams fell over in a field in Austria, clutching a copy of the Hitchhiker's Guide to Europe, gazed up at the stars, and had a really good idea for a science fiction story. Over the following decades, said drunken idea became a worldwide sensation and took the form of radio shows, books, video games, TV series, and even a big budget movie. I personally love all of them, except the movie, so of course that's what we're here to talk about today. Yay. As I believe I've now made abundantly clear, the 2005 Hitchhiker's film is currently my least favourite adaptation ever. Don't get me wrong, there's definitely worse out there, adaptations that flat out insult their source material or ignored it entirely, but for me, this was the perfect storm of things I didn't like. It was a combination of my personal obsession with the originals, disappointed expectations, subjective dislike of types of comedy, and an overwhelming amount of missed opportunities and misunderstood greatness. And this would usually be the point where I discuss my thoughts on the book and the film as individuals, but as you should be aware by now, those were not the only players in this game. So let's talk about the whole shebang. My first encounter with the works of Douglas Adams was way back in 1999 when I played the then relatively new CD-ROM game Starship Titanic, which he helped write, but oddly enough was based on a book set in his universe but written by someone else, one of the Pythons as it happens. My love for the radio show is hard to fully express. It's like it was custom made to fit my exact preferences for entertainment. It's science fiction, it's intelligent, it's deep but not preachy, it's exactly my kind of humour, being a combination of dry wit and surrealism. On top of that, I just loved the performances from all of the cast and thought the comedic timing was spot on. The books are also great, but in a different way. Obviously, the performance aspect of it was gone, but Adams more than made up for it with his hilarious descriptions. If I were forced to choose between them, I'd probably side with the radio show, but that might just be because I experienced that one first. I personally really like the TV show, though I will be the first to admit that it's become dated as fuck, with things like Zaphod's latex extra head becoming a bit of an eyesore. Other than that though, I still appreciate it as an adaptation and a standalone series. It's not easy to get a hold of these days, but it's worth the attempt, I think. All in all, I would definitely consider the Hitchhiker series a staple of my childhood and my adulthood, and a huge influence on my life in general, my sense of humour in particular, and this show as a result. And then there's the film. Made in 2005, it's predominantly an American production, but they did bring along some Englishmen for the ride, including executive producer Robbie Stamp, a close personal friend of Douglas Adams and the CEO of the production company he founded. Even through my rage at what a shitty adaptation this was, I still noticed some good things about this film just as a film, which I have to admit is quite impressive because I really wasn't looking for them. And for example, it's one of the best movies I've ever seen for being able to give you a sense of celestial scale. Scenes like the Earth being destroyed where the camera zooms out and out and out all the way up from a human perspective to a planetary one was really well done, and the fact that the Earth vanished with a whoosh instead of an explosion was a really nice touch because I felt like that was very in keeping with the original Hitchhiker's tone, e.g. this wasn't an act of war or malice, it was just business, a demolition, not an attack. The Earth and everyone on it ceased to exist without any real fuss, and quite frankly that's way more terrifying than the idea of a colossal explosion. One of the few jokes that actually got a laugh out of me was when they were in the airlock and they kept staring at the door behind them, but then fell through the floor. The reveal of the interdimensional planet workshop inside Magrathea was probably one of the more wonderful things I've ever seen in any movie. Again, probably because it was so unusually good at giving you a sense of the colossal size of everything. Unfortunately, its effect was lessened somewhat for me because it was immediately followed by a bunch of jokes I thought fell flat on their face. Oh, they're hand painting the planet and filling the oceans with a hose. Haha, that would take ages. Fuck off. It was inconsistent too. Seconds later, you see them raising a mountain, and they're not doing it with fucking shovels, are they? I couldn't help but notice that a lot of these small role actors were really bad in this. I mean, you know my feelings towards child acting already, but it wasn't just them. The adults were really monotone too. Keeping and updating the original theme tune was a really amazing idea. However, I was a bit perturbed by the lack of Wonderful World by Louis Armstrong. I mean, I remember it was in the early teaser trailers for the movie, but it was MIA by the time it actually came out. One of the first things that people tend to talk about in regards to this film is the Vogons being brought to life just using practical effects and avoiding the tired, overused computer-generated imagery that was, and still is, everywhere in films. And, well, yeah, the Vogons were kind of awesome, but what everyone seems to miss is apparently making them so sapped up all of the creativity available, because almost zero fucking effort was put into a lot of the other aliens. Whenever they needed to film a large crowd shot, everyone just looks like a bloody human. Well, except for those contact lenses. Gosh, don't get too out there or you'll give the original series Star Trek a run for its money. The only alien that we know for sure must have looked exactly like a human is Ford Prefect, because he blended in on the Earth for so long. But I would have thought it was obvious that was because he came from a race of people who had the ability to alter their own bodies at will, as demonstrated by Zaphod growing an extra arm and head. Even the TV show that had the budget and technology of a community theatre remembered to make the aliens look like bloody aliens. It was a long time before I forgave Martin Freeman for this movie. It took most of Sherlock and his stunning performance in Desolation of Smaug to finally redeem him in my eyes. Yasin Bey's performance as Ford seems a little off to me. I mean, I've seen him in enough other things to know that for a former hip-hop singer, he's not terrible as an actor, but he just seems really disconnected throughout a lot of this film. I don't know if this was a failed attempt to recreate Ford's original radio show disinterest in things. I mean, that's a very hard look to pull off, and the end result here is he just seems kind of bored. A slight nitpick in regards to the Heart of Gold doors. Now, the general idea is these doors have been given personalities by the Sirius Cybernetics Corporation, and they get such a pronounced sense of satisfaction from opening and closing for people that they can't help but sign contentment. It looks like they tried to include this, so you'd think I'd be talking about this in the adaptation review. But the problem is... Did that sound like contentment to you? Because to me it sounded more like the noise that quite a slow person makes after they've figured out the punchline to a joke 10 minutes after everyone else. BT dubs, I didn't miss the TV show's cast making cameos, but I didn't get all that excited by it either, to be completely honest. And finally, gosh, they did use an awful lot of low-res stock footage in this big-budget film, didn't they? I mean, I guess sending someone off to get some high-definition recordings of nature to use is a lot of effort, but it just stands out, that's all I'm saying. Now, before we get truly started, I suspect I need to preemptively address some of the arguments that fans of this movie tend to throw out in its defense, and get settled, because this is going to take a few minutes. One of the more annoying is, oh no, how can you hate this movie when it's got Stephen Fry, Bill Nighy, and Alan Rickman in it? Alan Rickman the Dom! Alan Rickman! To which my response has to be... Look, this is going too far. I liked Alan Rickman as much as the next guy, and I was very upset by his tragic and premature death, but this blind worship of him is getting out of hand. The mere presence of his voice in a movie is not enough to save it, I'm sorry. The other, more valid argument is the commonly held belief that Douglas Adams would have been fine with the film, because he was all for changes being introduced in adaptation, something I myself have mentioned in videos past. And this belief stems from interviews with Adams where he talks about the adaptation process, and how important it is to adjust certain things as much as is required to adapt and take full advantage of the new medium in which it's being experienced. He's also gone on record saying that he always ended up reinventing Hitchhikers every time he sat down to write a new book. And the evidence of him putting this into practice is clear and obvious when one considers the huge changes between the radio shows and the books from the second series onwards. It's a belief strengthened still by Robbie Stamp, often reminiscing about how excited Adams was to try some new things out in the film before his death, and claiming they used his original early draft of the script wherever possible. However, anyone who believes that this should impede what I assure you is going to be a rather damning review of this adaptation needs to have their head checked for Octura and Megaleeches, because something's definitely sucking out their brains. There are three very good reasons for this. The first is the assumption that I only review adaptations in order to defend the honour of the poor helpless book authors, and if they were happy with it, I should have no reason to complain as well, is quite frankly simply foolish. I would remind you that J.K. Rowling had no beef with the Harry Potter films, but that didn't stop me and Terence from tearing them apart. This is my show and my opinion is this adaptation sucked beyond belief. The second reason is I happen to disagree that any of what I just mentioned is proof that Douglas Adams was fine with people changing his stories. Yes, the books were intentionally different from the radio show, and yes, he was going to write some new things for the film, but guess what? All that proves is that Douglas Adams was fine with him changing his stories. Does no one else think it's a little telling that while he was alive, he was always in charge of adapting his own spoken word, radio to book, book to radio, radio and book to TV. He even held on to creative control of the text-adventure game from 1984. Sure, there were some licensed spin-offs by other authors, but every incarnation of the main Hitchhiker story had Douglas Adams at the helm until his last breath. Does that sound like someone who was fine with other people doing whatever they wanted with his stories? To believe that making vast changes himself means he was also perfectly happy to give anyone else a blank check to change as much as they want is bullshit, and I can cite evidence to support this. Adams said that the TV adaptation was definitely not his favourite of all the Hitchhiker's incarnations, and I can't see it as a coincidence that that would have been the one that he had comparatively the least creative control over because of all the additional people involved. Even if I'm full of shit and that wasn't the reason, how about this? In the 1980s, Adams sold the film rights to Ivan Reitman, but that adaptation fell apart because Adams withdrew because they were trying to make too many changes that he didn't like. Which leads me to my third and final reason as to why this isn't going to stop me, which is thus. While I have been guilty in the past of claiming that making changes to a story is in of itself fair grounds to deem it a bad adaptation, that is not the basis of my complaints here. No, my issue is the changes they chose to make ruined half the original jokes, dumbed down the plot, crowbarred in a bunch of new unnecessary arcs that don't fit the characters, and generally sapped away everything that was likeable about the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. On a related but slightly different note, I also have to call bullshit on claims that Adams wrote the majority of the screenplay for this film. He died 4 years before this film was made. The people involved didn't even claim he did. All they've ever said was he wrote a draft and they stuck to it wherever possible. That is not the same thing as a working script, I assure you. Things that appeared in this movie may have been his idea initially, but it takes more than a concept to make something clever or funny. There is little doubt in my mind that if Adams had lived to see this project to completion, I would have loved this film, changes and all. I truly believe that it would have had all the same magic as all the previous incarnations, and it would have been funny and subtle and so very, very intelligent. But he didn't. And it wasn't. They took all the new ideas that Adams came up with and they fucking ruined them with terrible presentation. So no, I'm sorry, no get out of jail free card for this film. It's going to get the same treatment as every other bad adaptation I've covered so far. Whew. Sorry for the extensive prologue, beautiful watchers. I just happen to know that a lot of other YouTubers who I respect quite like this movie, so if I'm gonna go against the flow, I have to make my case iron hard. That said, let's talk adaptation. As I've discussed in videos past, the Hitchhiker's universe is a tad different to anything I've reviewed so far because it lacks a definitive canon. I'm not going to go over it all again, but suffice to say, even though there are big differences between the events of the radio show, the books, and the TV show, none of them, and all of them, can be considered the definitive timeline. The film clearly wished to not be left out of this tradition because, even though it seems to rely most heavily on the book, it also clearly draws from all 3 incarnations of the story, and even recklessly borrowed things from the sequels as well. I hope you all appreciate what a difficult position this puts me in. Things that are inaccurate to one version of the story might be perfectly in keeping with another, and with no definite original to refer to, it's damn near impossible to decide if they should go in the same changed or left out category. After much deliberation, I believe I've come up with an elegant solution to this problem in the form of a temporary new category. Okay, so, of the 4 major differences between the radio show and the book that I talked about in my last video, the film chose to side with the book with 3 of them. The white mice are total dicks trying to kill Arthur and take his brain so they can dissect it and look for the ultimate question that they think is hidden within. The film ends with them leaving Magnafear in the Heart of Gold, cutting out all the subsequent events of the radio show, including going to the restaurant at the end of the universe by accident, having a meal there, stealing a spaceship, the Golgafrinchen B arc, and ending up on prehistoric Earth. And everyone is very emotionally invested in their quests and situations. Arthur and Trillian are both understandably upset by the destruction of Earth, and Zaphod becomes suicidal after his apparent failure to find the ultimate question. The only thing they chose to ignore from the book and lean back towards the radio show in regards to is the complete lack of conspiracies. Zaphod is back to having given up the presidency because he was bored and thought he could become more rich and famous as an adventurer, as opposed to being a sleeper agent for a group of people trying to discover who was really running the universe. And the Earth is back to being the victim of an uncaring bureaucratic system that just doesn't give any kind of a fuck, instead of being destroyed as part of a master plan to keep the universe from being happy. This was probably because most of the payoff for that stuff took place in the second book, and the film really didn't strike me as being interested in setting up sequels. The Vogons chasing the Heart of Gold around trying to destroy it isn't completely new, because it's something that takes place in the second book and radio series, even if their reasons for doing so are kind of different. Gag Halfram, the brain care specialist who appeared in the background of the movie for for a few seconds takes a surprising amount of explaining. Halfram is a character from the second series of the radio show who's quite significant because it transpires he's one of the people who arranged the before-mentioned master plan to destroy the Earth, because he didn't want the universe finding out the ultimate question, becoming content, and not needing psychiatrists anymore. If you were confused by his apparently completely random line, well, Zaphod's just this guy, you know, that's because it's a recurring joke from the radio show that makes a lot more sense in context. However, to chastise the movie for this lack of sense-making would be unfair, because that line was the only part of his dialogue that made it into the book as well, so it's more of a pre-existing bad adaptation, if you will. It's one of the few examples of where I thought Adams slipped up when adapting the radio show to book, because he clearly thought that Halfram's jokes wouldn't work well in written form, but wasn't quite willing to give up on them altogether, resulting in just the punchline remaining, which just seemed odd and out of place on its own. I guess what I'm trying to say, in a kind of long-winded way, is I'm surprised he's in the film at all. I'm thinking he should be considered more of an Easter egg than part of the adaptation process. The plot twist that it was Zaphod who signed the Earth's demolition order was borrowed from Season 2, and it was Arthur who got upset about it there, not Trillian, who wasn't in Season 2. Right, now that that's made things even more confusing than before, we can now move on to the usual categories. The first third of the movie is by far the most accurate to its predecessors. Not everything I'm about to describe is 100% on target, which obviously I'll come back to later, but it is at least present and recognisable. Arthur's house getting demolished without fair warning by the Council, the Earth getting demolished without fair warning by the Vogons, Ford saving Arthur by getting them beamed onto the Vogon ship, the poetry reading, being cast out of the airlock, being picked up by the Heart of Gold, Zaphod being on the run from the intergalactic government for stealing said Heart of Gold, and Trillian, Arthur's crush, being on board. After that, the film's adherence to the plot gets way more tenuous. They do, however, stick to some things throughout, including the explanation that humans are only the third most intelligent species on Earth, behind the dolphins and the white mice. The dolphins becoming aware of Earth's impending doom, attempting to warn the humans before leaving, but finding us far too stupid to understand their mode of communication. Arthur's iconic dressing gown, first introduced in a TV show and so popular it was incorporated into all subsequent adaptations and sequels. The Babelfish, the creature that one can put inside one's ear to instantly understand all languages in the universe. The beautiful jeweled crabs that were killed and occasionally eaten by the Vogons. The nice little detail that the Vogons' noses are located at the top of their unpleasant faces. The brown substance provided by the Heart of Gold being almost nothing like tea and detested by Arthur. There are, apparently, some lines from the radio show that are just so iconic they make it into every incarnation of the story. My personal favourite being...
This must be Thursday. I never could get the hang of Thursdays.
This must be Thursday. I never could get the hang of Thursdays.
Must be Thursday. Could never get the hang of Thursdays.
Look, Arthur.
Zaphod's terrible dress sense is referenced, though, I don't know, I think he looks kind of cool there, which is probably a rather damning reflection of my personal tastes. The Pangalactic Gargle Blaster, the insanely strong alcoholic drink that Zaphod invented, made it into the film, though its effect on carbon-based life forms seems to have been toned down somewhat. They incorporated the white mice kicking about and manipulating the group into doing what they wanted all the way through, the first of any adaptation to actually show this instead of just saying it happened later. The "please do not press this button again" button is referenced, though in a new context. The Magnaphean automated defense missiles that almost destroyed the Heart of Gold being turned into a sperm whale and a bowl of petunias by the infinite improbability drive. The Magnaphean's history of building planets for people, though as I'll explain in a bit, that's pretty much all they got right about those guys. A nice combination of adaptations is the Hitchhiker's Guide explaining things as they go along, which is from the radio show, and the fact that it's animated, which is from the TV show. So, like I said before, there are worse adaptations out there. I grudgingly have to admit that this is still recognisably the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. However, it's finally time for me to explain why I hate this adaptation so much. First and foremost amongst the all-encompassing changes in the film is the type of humour it attempts to utilise. Now, I'm not saying it wasn't funny, because that would be unfair. Being funny is, of course, very subjective. Personally, I found it about as funny as the idea of getting a vasectomy without an anaesthetic, but I'm sure someone somewhere was amused by it. What I am saying is almost everything that made the previous incarnations funny, the dry wit, the bizarre priorities of all the cast, and the double meanings to everything, is almost entirely absent in the film. It was replaced with slapstick humour, which is is disappointing but mostly harmless, and, to my personal horror and disgust, cringe humour, a trend that was quite fashionable in the mid-2000s and which is, in my opinion, an abomination to comedy. Popularised by shows such as The Office, which, not coincidentally, also starred Martin Freeman, its basic concept is showing embarrassing and socially awkward situations and hoping the audience will get a kick out of cringing over it.
I guess most of the people who come to these sort of parties are drunken idiots.
What?
I said all these people are idiots. God.
I have to confess there are few things in this world I hate more than this type of humour, and seeing it crowbarred into something that used to be as smart and witty as Hitchhikers almost prompted me to walk out of the cinema. Again, I am aware that me hating it is not relevant, but it not being in keeping with the original source material most certainly is. The film also handled the Douglas Adams jokes that they did keep from the previous incarnations very badly in my opinion. I got the distinct impression that in some of the best scenes they were just sort of going through the motions and expecting it to still be amusing, just referencing the jokes from the radio show and the book as if that was all that was needed to make it funny in the film as well. Let me give you some examples. In the radio show, book, and TV show, the reveal that it was going to take Deep Thought's 7.5 million years to work out the ultimate answer was built up and cleverly misdirected and tied into another bunch of jokes involving a union of philosophers and the idea that they might go on strike. What made it funny was the clever way it was delivered. In the film, it's just stated, okay, I'll think about it, come back in 7.5 million years, and these super beings barely even react to the information that they're going to have to wait all that time for the answer. Then later, when the white mice are talking about quitting their mission to unravel the mysteries of the universe after millions and millions of years to go and be TV stars instead, it's just sort of slipped into the conversation and again, no one reacts to it. Any comedian will tell you that 90% of a joke is the presentation, it's the way you tell it. The film doesn't treat the old jokes as jokes, it just presents you with the information as plot development. The before mentioned slapstick introduced into the film takes several forms, the most prominent being some sort of Three Stooges sketch where Arthur, Ford and Zaphod try to figure out how to pilot the Heart of Gold's escape pod. There's also a scene right after that where they're getting literally slapped. The concept of a creature that attacks you every time you have an idea is supposedly one of the things that Douglas Adams suggested before his death. The thing is though, I strongly suspect that Adams had planned to explain what the fuck it was and come up with some hilarious reason for it to be doing that. Without said reason, it seems entirely pointless and just an excuse to keep the Three Stooges bit going. In the film, and just the film, there's a joke where Ford can't tell the difference between a human male and a human female. How does that make any sense when he's been living on the planet for 15 years and half the races in the galaxy, including his own, look exactly like us anyway? Unlike the book where he's just as pained by it as everyone else, Arthur seems unaffected by the Vogon poetry in the film and appears simply confused by the situation. This kind of spoils the original joke that there are some poems out there that are just so bad they physically hurt people and instead implies that aliens just kind of react to stuff weirdly. The perspective gun is another thing claimed to have originated from Douglas Adams, and yeah, I'll buy that. The concept has his creative fingerprints all over it. Its application in the film, however, I'm less sure about, as giving it to Marvin just seems like a rehash of the time when he interfaced with the police computer and it erased itself as a result. As I said earlier, my feelings towards Martin Freeman have warmed over the years since I saw this movie, enough so that I'm willing to admit that there's nothing wrong with his acting in this film. The acting is not the problem. No, the problem is why they chose to cast him in particular and the way they wrote his character. Put another way, what the fuck did they do to Arthur Dent in this movie? The film basically transplanted Martin Freeman's character from The Office into the Hitchhiker's universe with all of his awkward non-humour and complete lack of backbone. Freeman played Arthur as a snivelling, whiny little wuss of a man who got bullied by Zaphod because he didn't have the stones to stand up to him, who cowered in the corner under fire, pouring at Trillian trying to stop her from doing anything heroic, and got left behind on Magnafia because he was too afraid to step through the portal while it was still active. Now, I don't usually do this, but I'm just going to play you something from the original source material.
Want to make something of it?
I beg your minuscule pardon.
I said, do you want to make something of it?
Arthur?
Arthur, he's got a hammer the size of a telegraph pole.
This is madness, Earthman.
Do I want to make something of it?
Yes. You want to step outside?
Alright!
That, my beautiful watchers, was Arthur Dent challenging Thor, the god of thunder, to a fistfight over Trillion. Now, admittedly, this was part of a clever trick, because what Arthur knew and Thor had forgotten was that the building they were standing in was in fact flying, so the second that Thor stepped through the door, he fell several miles to the ground. But my point is, Arthur Philip Dent may not have been an action hero, but he was a hot-blooded, proud Englishman and had a serious pair of balls. As far as I'm concerned, Arthur Dent is right up there with James Bond, No. 6 and Sherlock Holmes as iconic British icons, and this portrayal of him is an insult to my entire nation. Fuck you, film. Well, at least I can take solace in the fact that there can't be anything else quite as enraging as that in this film, because...
Let's go somewhere.
Definitely. Where did you have in mind?
I know there's a great restaurant at the end of the universe.
Not that anyone cares what I say, but the restaurant is at the other end of the universe.
The restaurant at the end of the universe is at the end of time! It's not the physical end of the universe, because that would be the fucking edge of the universe! And there's no such thing as the other end of time, because that would be the beginning! Also, the Big Bang Burger Bar, but that's a whole other thing! The last joke of the movie, the thing you thought was good enough to end on, doesn't make any fucking sense in context or out of it! This was in the radio show, the TV show, and all of the books, one of which is fucking named after it! How the fuck did you misunderstand the basic concept of the restaurant at the end of the universe, you fucking imbeciles! Belgium! Hey beautiful watchers, if you enjoyed this episode, might I request you throw it a like or share it on social media. It's the kind of thing that really helps boost the channel on YouTube due to the fickle nature of its analytics. In other news, I'm still on a quest to share all my favourite other channels with you, so let's talk about Kaluna. Hopefully some of you may remember her from our Magfest crossover, but for those of you who don't, she's Channel Awesome's other book fanatic, discussing things like Peter Pan adaptations or things from Game of Thrones that don't compare well to the original Song of Ice and Fire series. On top of that, she also reviews video games, anime, films, and does the occasional Let's Play, so you get a wide range of stuff on her channel. If you have some free time, I encourage you to follow the link in the video description and check it out.